So the next slide is from Coyote. I think it's just an interesting, I just brought it because it was an old image from 79. And it's kind of cute because Margot used to, and a lot of sex worker activists talk about this kind of kiss and tell campaign. Why is it that our clients are all these politicians who then turn around and pass laws against us? And she's always, of course there's a code that you don't turn in your clients, and that's very central to prostitution. There's never been any kind of like organized strategy to put pressure on those politicians who are our clients. But I think it's just an interesting manifestation of the early sex worker rights movement. I don't know, they never took it quite far. So I'm going to turn the page quite a bit further because the advent of the AIDS crisis certainly had an extremely profound effect on prostitutes' rights. And really was responsible for a huge amount of organizing and truthfully for a lot of funding based on the governmental desire to stop AIDS. So whereas prior to that, prostitutes' rights movement was primarily influenced by organizations who were pretty much only involved in community political issues amongst prostitutes. Suddenly the movement was equally influenced by AIDS outreach organizations who were providing services to sex workers. Well, I'm not necessarily sure that's such a bad thing. I remember when I saw that, because I was involved in the movement before and after, I was nervous and I was feeling like, why do we have to sit around and watch prostitution only be dealt with in terms of AIDS prevention? We have other rights. We have other issues. And all we'll be talking about is defending ourselves in terms of AIDS. But AIDS was such an important issue. And one of the most important things is that we were quite wary of the repercussions of the Contagious Disease Acts in the 19th century in England and what kinds of oppression were put upon prostitutes from the system. So there was incarceration of prostitutes, mass incarceration. There were invasive medical checks. I don't know if you've heard stories that they would give, the medical checks to see if the prostitutes had diseases, but they would use the same speculum and they would pass diseases. Have you heard about things like that? Well, they were testing the prostitutes with the same speculum for venereal disease. So, it's because of like the state of medical attention, but, prostitutes have always been, in some way, guinea pigs around STDs and health checks. And that was also something that we've had to resist. Right now in Cambodia, there was a huge, and also international protest around how the prostitutes in Cambodia were treated in the context of the Tenavir trials. So many prostitutes felt in the latest health strategies for disease prevention, they have also been used. So in the AIDS crisis, we were very concerned. I mean, historically, actually, the mid-1850s and the Contagious Disease Acts had the most profound effect on prostitution laws. And that is actually when the abolitionist movement was born in response to the fact that prostitutes were locked up. And that's when they came up with the strategy that they were going to decriminalize prostitution per se. It was actually kind of a feminist movement. Not just, I don't know, probably there were prostitutes involved, but they weren't out. So that movement really began to come up with this decriminalized model as they have it in Europe. But the model was certainly problematic. And then that movement divided into two. Those who were protesting the confinement of women as a response to Contagious Disease Acts, and those who saw that the abolitionist models weren't necessarily going to work, and were worried about the repressive strategies that were emerging in the context of the abolitionist efforts. So there was an interesting division that was even emerging then, and I know there was like Teresa Billingston-Craig, who was this famous feminist that they likened her to Camille Paglia, because she was more on the side of the sex of the prostitutes. And so there was an interesting this split. There are historical. I'm not going to say it's continued, but I just want to say it's a historical background, and there's a way in which, since women have been able to participate politically, that there's been real discourse and real movement happening. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this is we do have a new movement, and there's so much promise in that we're so new. So the AIDS crisis, we were concerned about the history of the health checks. We're also concerned because we knew that the laws could be problematic. So right now, in many states, the laws that we were afraid of actually did pass. And we couldn't fight it. We weren't successful. We worked with ACT UP, with AIDS activist groups, and they supported us and created a lot of allies. But basically, we couldn't really fight these laws. So now, in my state and many others, and not yours apparently, it's a felony if you're HIV positive, even to do a hand job. No, to solicit a hand job, even if you're going to use a condom. If I'm HIV positive, and I say, like, I'll do a hand job for you with a condom. Now that's the felony. I mean, the idea is they make the speech the felony because they can't really get at the act. So it's not like they really want to make the speech the felony. I mean, I'm apologizing for it, but I shouldn't. So, it's a felony in many states. And it's a very scary thing. I mean, I know people who are not necessarily natural allies say, well, if all these people have diseases, we should put them in jail. That's a good idea. And I think you realize, how many countries have a huge percentage of their population who are HIV positive. Can we really, does anybody from a moral basis even want to entertain the vague notion that we should take all the prostitutes in the world and put them in prison? When you really start thinking of the condition of the world, you know that you need another solution. But in this country, well, in my state, it prescribes a year for that charge. But people are routinely given 4 years. One person I saw was given 9 years. I don't know what the person did, what they were sentenced, how much time they did, but they were sentenced to 9 years. This affects transgender sex workers. Guess who they target with these laws? So there hasn't been much, fight back about this, and I have to say it's not a success. So what was a success in the AIDS crisis is that we have a huge international that was in truth funded by money that was given to do outreach to prostitutes, to teach about safe sex. Prostitutes were suddenly recognized as safe sex educators. People realized that, first of all, we care about our health, we're responsible, we can teach other people, including clients, about health. And that we did achieve status. Sex work organizations are recognized at the United Nations and have been very, very powerful participants in international policy around prostitution. So, to see an organization of sex workers sit down at the table as an official body in the UN, that's quite an advance. So, a lot has been done that's been very positive. This is just about the quarantine. When you're put in prison and you're HIV positive, you are in a punitive quarantine, only by default. Because if you go to prison, if they don't have funding to give the quarantined people the library access and the books and the this and the that, your special place that you go into jail in winds up being punitive because they don't have the resources to give you as much. So there's a punitive aspect. So just think about going to prison, they know you're positive, and you're in a punitive incarceration. That's, what it comes to in this country. It's showing you, this is also from demonstrations around that period protesting the country's policies. You see the Sex Workers Unite.